You're listening to the Renegade Blitz Podcast, a podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. And welcome back to the Renegade Blitz. I'm Ty Polk with Chris Ward and Brandon Walker. It's our first preview episode of the season with Brandon, as we'll go into week 2 with the Las Vegas Raiders. And guys, it's been a good week for the Steelers coming off the victory for Buffalo. And there's one thing to talk about. Cam Hayward was named the highest rated player from Pro Football Focus this week. He had a 95.5 rating. Guys, let's get your thoughts very quickly on that.
Yeah, I thought, he was very deserving of it. I mean, I know Neil Coulon of USA Today, he said he thought that was his best game of his career. And, it's hard to disagree with, he was just so dominant, just creating havoc all day against that Buffalo offensive line. I did see some people in the comments say Chandler Jones should have been the highest graded player because he did have 5 sacks. But, it's hard to disagree with what Hayward displayed against the Bills.
Yeah, he had 12 pressures and he recovered a fumble. He owned the left tackle from the Bills all day long. It was just bad. Like I told you before, I don't know how many he was responsible for. They held TJ Watt twice, but they held him at least 3 to 4 times. One of them they called, 3 or 4 they didn't. I'm like, yeah, he was just nasty on Sunday. So yeah,
it was a great game by him, and I think it was a lot of that. You think about the dropbacks, the blitz per dropbacks for the Steelers, 3.9%. It felt like they were bringing 5, all because of his pressures that game. That was just an absolute masterclass. Really, the entire pass rush for the Steelers. I mentioned it on the podcast page with Melvin Ingram, but also a big part of that was Cam Hayward and Tyson Alualu, and also the trio of Wormley, Bugs, and so much others.
Most definitely.
And now let's talk about the Raiders coming into Pittsburgh for the home opener. And Chris, the spread is 5.5, but I imagine with a couple of the Raiders' injuries that may potentially go up. But also, the Raiders did have a good performance on Monday night against the Ravens.
Oh no, the line was at 6 on Monday night, and then after Tuesday morning, it dropped to 5.5 after that win over the Ravens. The Raiders are 7-1 against the spread in their last 8 games against the Steelers, and are 5-2 straight up in their last 7 games against Pittsburgh, according to Oddshark.com. However, Las Vegas is 1-4 straight up in their last 5 games when playing on the road against the Steelers. So. That's something to look out for on Sunday. The Steelers, they in their former place there with the Raiders in Oakland, they were terrible. I mean, Ben Roethlisberger's 0-4 in Oakland in his career, but at home, he's 2-1, and they won 4 of their last 5 games against the Raiders at home.
Brandon, do you like those odds? Do you think you're going to go down the Rivers?
I don't think I'm going down the Rivers, but yeah, only because of the injuries, I would say it's a fair spread. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Raiders cover because they are always a tough matchup no matter where they are against Pittsburgh. I mean, the Steelers, especially when they played in Oakland. But the game could be here at Heinz Field this Sunday, so we'll see how that goes. And I think it's going to be a good matchup. I think there will be a better matchup than Buffalo in a way, like I reiterated on Monday.
I've seen a couple Steelers fans say that this could be a tougher matchup for the Steelers, even with the injuries, and I'm intrigued by the Raiders. I've always admired that franchise from whether it's Oakland, Los Angeles, and now Las Vegas.
Yeah, it'll be quite the opposite if the Steelers were to lose to the Raiders because everyone's picking the Steelers this week to win, and last week as we saw, everyone was on Buffalo. So I think it will be a close game though. But it's interesting that Ben Roethlisberger and Mike Tomlin, they both have losing records against the Raiders. Ben's 2-5 and Tomlin's 2-4 in their careers. So it should be a competitive game on Sunday, I think.
We'll find out more about the Raiders as we have a guest coming up next. and we welcome on Tashan Reed. He covers the Raiders for The Athletic. Tashan, thank you for coming on the show.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me.
The Steelers and the Raiders pulled off wins last week as underdogs. And in regards to the Raiders, they had probably one of the best Monday Night Football games ever with that victory over the Ravens in overtime at Allegiant Stadium. The first game played in front of fans in Las Vegas. What was the atmosphere like covering that game, Tashan, and what's the feeling around Las Vegas with the Raiders team?
Yeah, I mean, that was only the second time they really done anything in Allegiant Stadium in front of fans. They had one preseason game at home and had about 50,000 or so fans there. But at that time, they still had the mask mandates and things of that nature. So this time they're one of the teams that, require fans to be vaccinated, and kind of as an incentive of doing that, fans get to take off their masks and people get a little bit more loose and probably drink a little bit more, relax a little bit. So it was pretty loud in there. A good amount of Ravens fans, you kind of heard sometimes when, and I think that's going to be a consistent trend with the Raiders, just as, fans from other teams, they want to come check out their team play in a new stadium, or maybe, people who live on the West Coast and don't live in the city that their team is from. But, it was rocking in there. I mean, it was a crazy game. The Raiders tend to not make it easy, and that was another example of it. They had basically won the game twice, kind of off of self-inflicted injuries that they had there, but ended up coming out with a W.
And Tashan, I wonder, what's the feeling like with this Raiders team? Like, there were some reports about Mike Mayock, the general manager, being on the hot seat, and possibly John Gruden. This is a big year for them. What have you been seeing from that? Do you think this is a crucial year for both of them?
On Gruden, no. I mean, with that contract that he had, he's not. Gruden's not going anywhere. As far as Mayock, yeah, I think it's fair to say. I mean, he was even, transparent himself. I believe he was doing an interview with the NFL Network, maybe, or one of the major networks, and he was saying that it's time to get wins, or he might be sitting on that broadcast side again next year, and so Gruden has complete control. He makes final calls, but Mayock obviously is involved with the draft process and their scouting and free agency, and so. If they fall short again this year, given his track record that he's had with having a couple of drafts under his belt and some of their misses that they've had in free agency, if they fall short again, then Mayock is somebody that could be on the hot seat. It's not guaranteed, of course, but he definitely would be somebody that would take the fall long before Gruden would.
All right, Tashan. Derek Carr had an impressive game on Monday night, especially in the fourth quarter, coming back and putting together a drive to set up for a game-winning field goal. And he completed 34-56 with 435 yards and 2 touchdowns. What did you think about Carr's performance, and what are the expectations for him now that he's in his 8th season? Because I know they had a lot of things going on with Mariota. They think he was going to try to step in, like in a Ryan Tannehill situation last year and this year. How do you feel about his performance, and how you think he's going to do moving forward?
I'll start on as far as his stats. I mean, I know that was kind of a narrative going into last year, but there was never really any question about Carr's status as a starter. It's his team at this point. Like the gap between Carr and Mariota is very substantial, and so something would have to happen to Carr, as it did, in the game last year. The one time Mariota played when Carr got hurt, he came in, but Mariota at this point for the Raiders is more of a gadget guy. Get out there, run some zone reads. He re-aggravated a quad injury that he had in the preseason, so he may not be available this week. It depends on how the week goes on. He didn't practice today. But go back to Carr. I think he got off to kind of a shaky start against the Ravens. He has a new offensive line in front of him, and so it seems like he was a little bit uncomfortable. He was forcing the ball a bit to Waller. Not a bad guy to force the ball to, but nearly threw a couple interceptions, and it seemed like he had a little bit of tunnel vision. He improved drastically in the second half, and was really instrumental in the offense picking things up and helping to make that 14-point comeback. And then obviously in overtime, I know he had that interception, but that was I would say that was more so on the receiver. The ball could have been thrown a little bit better, but it went through receiver's hands and then it got deflected and intercepted. And so I would say pretty much from the start of the third quarter on, he was pretty great against the Ravens, but he had a kind of shaky start. And so obviously he wants to avoid that going up against another tough defense this week. You don't want to, play too much with falling into those early holes.
And there's a really solid receiving corps out in Las Vegas with Henry Ruggs, Brian Edwards, and Hunter Renfrow. But of course, Carr's favorite target is Darren Waller. He had 19 targets and 10 receptions for 105 yards and a touchdown. What are your thoughts on this receiving corps and Waller, who's really an exceptional talent with his size and speed? Mike Tomlin even compared him to a tight end playing Chase Claypool.
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly their number one target. It's been that way for a couple of years now. He's, obviously he's a tight end, but he sort of acts as their X receiver in a way. The way that they use him to move him around, split him out wide, and things of that nature. But as far as the rest of the receiving corps, is pretty much bunch of young and unproven guys. Yeah, Hunter Renfrow is, he's shown himself to be a legitimate slot receiver in the league. But for Brian Edwards and Henry Ruggs, guys that are in their second season now, they've shown flashes here and there, but they haven't been able to kind of put it together consistently. I think week one was a great example of that. I mean, through 3 quarters, those guys were essentially non-factors. And then all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, both Brian Edwards and Ruggs started making plays. And then obviously Edwards had what looked like the game-winning touchdown in overtime before Zay Jones had the one that actually won it. And so I think for their outside receivers, they're still kind of searching for consistency. It seems like Carr is still working on trusting them in actual live action. But the Raiders, I mean, they're a unique team. They're not your typical offense. They still do a lot of that old school stuff, 2 running back sets, 2 tight end sets, even 3 tight end sets. And so I think the majority of their snaps that they had against the Ravens, they had 2 or fewer receivers on the field. And they're typically a team that doesn't target receivers all that often. And so when it comes to the actual wide receivers, they tend to not have as many targets as maybe some other teams would. But, just off of Waller alone and the kind of the matchup nightmare that he is definitely a group that I would consider a strength for the team.
And the Raiders, they didn't get much going on the ground game against the Ravens as running back Josh Jacobs rushed for 34 yards and 10 carries. However, he did have 2 rushing touchdowns near the goal line. And Jacobs was coming off back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons. Did the Raiders just match up bad against the Ravens' run defense, or do you expect the offense to be more pass-heavy this year with the impressive receiving corps?
They definitely want to run, but it's something that's been an issue the last couple of years, mostly due to injury. Last year, their offensive line was pretty beat up, and even though Jacobs had a 1,000-yard season, his efficiency dropped pretty much across the board, and for all of their running backs, they just didn't have as great of a year. And coming into this year, I mean, they were relying on basically 2 guys that had never entered the season as starters in their center and Andre James, and their rookie right tackle and Alex Leatherwood, and they had injuries. I mean, Richie Incognito, one of their starting guards, he went down in the preseason and he missed that game. And so you had John Simpson, he's a second-year player, had to step in. And then on the first drive of the game, Denzel Good, their other starting guard, went down. And so they had 2 starters that were out against the Ravens and a bunch of three pretty young guys out there trying to make it work. And so, when you're kind of piecing it together on your offensive line, running the ball is typically something that you struggle against, especially, against kind of a front that the Ravens have. And so, Denzel Good got announced today that he suffered a torn ACL, so he'll be out for the season. Incognito, he's nursing a calf injury, so it's kind of dicey whether he'll play against the Steelers this week. And so it'll probably be another week where maybe they're not able to have that much success on the ground, given how their offensive line performed from a run standpoint. But Gruden, he's a coach that wants to run the ball, but as we saw, I mean, Derek Carr almost had 60 pass attempts. If it's not working, you can't just run for the sake of running, so they will air it out if need be.
Okay, all right. It looks like the only starter that you guys had from last year is Colton Miller, because Rodney Hudson went to the Cardinals, Gabe Jackson went to the Seahawks, and they lost another lineman to the free agency as well. So how do you guys, the Raiders, feel about your matchup against TJ Watt? Because he's going to be going up against Alex Leatherwood. He had 2 sacks and a forced fumble last week. So how do you feel about that matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I had to ask them how they feel about it. But I mean, they bring back Colton Miller, and then Incognito. If he wasn't injured, he's a returning starter, and as well as John Simpson, he was on the team as well last year. So along with Andre James, and so. It's Alex Leatherwood is really the only fresh newcomer who hasn't been in this system already for a little bit. So, really the issue more so than having guys who aren't familiar with the system or the scheme or whatever. It's just injuries right now. And so, TJ Watt, I think it doesn't, I mean, no matter how good your offensive line is, you're going to be worried about him, right? I mean, he's one of the best, if not arguably the best edge rusher in the game right now. And so, Alex Leatherwood, that rookie right tackle, it's going to be a big test and whenever they draw that matchup. And on the other side, even for Colton Miller, I mean, he's proven himself to be a pretty high-level tackle at this point. But as I said, I mean, when you're dealing with an elite player like that, it's always going to be a task. And also, on the inside with Cameron Hayward. And so I think, right now I would say the Raiders, their tackles are stronger than their interior offensive line with those two guards going down, as I mentioned, and having a new center and Andre James kind of figuring things out in his first few games as a starter. And so I think the Steelers, they could have, success getting pressure across the line, but I really think on the interior is where the biggest opportunity awaits for the Steelers and where the biggest concern is for the Raiders.
And now let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. The Raiders pass rush had a great night against the Ravens, especially Max Crosby, who just straight up abused Alejandro Villanueva at times. According to Pro Football Focus, the Raiders generated a pass rush on 59% of dropbacks against the Ravens, which was a big improvement early on. What are your thoughts about the Raiders pass rush, specifically Max Crosby, who's going to have another favorable matchup on Sunday against the Steelers' right tackle, Chuks Okorafor, and also I know that there's a couple injuries on the defensive line for the Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, with that 2019 draft class, I mean, the Raiders have been getting a lot of flack, so far rightfully so for drafting Cleve Farrell, number 4 overall, but the best pass rusher they got that year ended up being Max Crosby that they found in the 4th round, and they've been a good player his first 2 years, but I mean, in that first game, I mean, he looked, like a budding star. He's somebody that in the past he's struggled with run defense, honestly, and there are kind of questions. Maybe is he best fit as a rotational pass rusher? And against the Ravens, he looked like an every down guy. I mean, he was giving them fits. And obviously, they signed Yannick Ngakoue this offseason, and he played well as well early on. He did get hurt. He had a hamstring injury in the second half, and so he didn't get to finish the game. But it kind of cleared the way for Carl Nassib, who signed with them last year, but really struggled in his first season. But he came up with that huge strip sack of Lamar Jackson in overtime, and he had a few pressures. I think he had 5 pressures overall in the game, and so it wasn't just that one play for him. And so, Farrell was inactive. He was a healthy scratch. Ngakoue, he did go through walkthroughs today. We'll have to see how that hamstring goes throughout the week. Those are always tricky, but if Ngakoue is out, then surely, Farrell will be active for this game against the Steelers. So that's kind of the big questions for them on the edge is Ngakoue ready to go? Because that duo of him and Crosby, did look fierce. But, if he isn't there, Nassib, he looked pretty good, but obviously he's not, Ngakoue and to that level. And so that's something that I'm sure, obviously, both the Raiders and the Steelers will be watching as this week progresses. The injury that you spoke of as well on the inside, Gerald McCoy, he suffered a knee injury and he'll be out for the season. He had been their backup one technique. They're pretty deep at tackle. And so, he was, like I said, he was already a backup. And so it's not so much with him. I don't think that'll have a huge on-field impact as much as, he just brought that veteran locker room presence and was helping the young guys along the way. But on the inside, I mean, they have Quentin Jefferson and Darius Philon and Solomon Thomas and Jonathan Hankins. So they have a good group of guys there on the interior. And so really it's just about Ngakoue, I think, whether this team kind of reached a level in terms of pass rush as it did in week 1. But I think even without him, they still be pretty good.
And at linebacker, they have a trio of Corey Littleton, Denzel Perryman, and former longtime Seahawks linebacker KJ Wright. How is Wright fitting into the Raiders' defensive scheme?
Yeah, I mean, he was a late addition. He joined after the preseason games wrapped up. But as you mentioned, being a longtime Seahawk, they played cover 3 up there, as their primary defense for years. And so he's used to the system with Gus Bradley. He played under Gus Bradley his first couple of years in the league. And so there was a low familiarity, but, he stepped in right away as their starting Sam linebacker. The Raiders are a team that, nickel really is their base defense. And so it was Perriman and Littleton who were the 2 primary linebackers on the field in that case. But, when they did go with their traditional 4-3 base, Wright did come in and He only had 2 tackles, but he did make a nice 4-for-1 stop. But it'll be interesting to see if he plays a little bit more this week. I think he had 30-something snaps. He kind of split snaps with the nickel back. If they have Nate Hobbs, they rotate. Anytime Nate Hobbs came in the game, KJ Wright would come out and vice versa. So we'll see if they lean one way or another. I guess it probably would likely depend, if the Steelers are having success on the ground or not.
All right, moving on to the secondary. They got Trayvon Mullen Jr. and Fulham Charger Casey Hayward Jr. as their corners, and Jonathan Abram for a first-round pick at strong safety, and Trayvon Mooring at free safety. Pass defense has been a big issue for the Raiders the past few years. How do you feel about the Raiders secondary this season, and how do you think they match up against the Steelers' deep wide receiving corps?
Yeah, I think their secondary has gotten a little better just because of natural progression, for one. I mean, Trayvon Mullen is his 3rd year. Jonathan Abrams is his 3rd year. And so you kind of expect those guys to start clicking at this point. They do have a couple rookie starters, like I said, in Merrick and Hobbs. And so, those kind of guys are always going to have growing pains along the way. Casey Hayward, I mean, he's, established as a veteran at this point. He is getting a little bit older, but he looked pretty sharp in week 1, I thought. And so they've seemed to benefit from the scheme change. In the last couple of years, they were running a cover 6 defense under Paul Gunther with more 2-high looks, and it was more complex and complicated, and that can be an issue for young defensive backs. And the cover 3 scheme is much more simple. It allows the guy to play more free. Abram has transitioned into more of a box role this season. So in week 1, he took most of his snaps either in the box or lined up at the slot, and so he's not responsible for as many of those deep zones anymore, and so that kind of lessens the room that he has to make mistakes. And really with that cover 3, obviously the goal is to take away the intermediate to deep passes, and they're kind of susceptible to some underneath stuff as a result of that. The Ravens did have some success kind of having some short passes and getting yards after the catch, but that's something that they're going to live with in this defense. They really don't change too much out of that cover 3, even if teams start hitting underneath. And so obviously with the Steelers and Big Ben, as he's aged, he's really prioritized getting it out quickly and allowing those talented receivers to get to work after the catch. And so tackling will be a big point of emphasis, obviously, for that secondary. Even if you allow those underneath completions, you have to be able to limit them to, as least amount of yardage as you can. And so if they have some missed tackles out there, the Steelers can still create some big plays, even if they aren't, completing those long passes down the field. And so, the secondary looked good in week 1, but it's definitely a challenge with that loaded Steelers receiver score.
So we're now in the final couple questions that we have right now. So my question is this: if the Raiders were to win this game, who would you think would be the biggest factor in that victory?
I don't know so much if it would be an individual, but I think just position group wise, it would have to be the offensive line. I mean, if coming off those injuries and kind of having some of the struggles that they had in week 1, if they're able to not necessarily dominate, but even just be, pretty good against the Steelers defensive front with how talented they are and how they made the Bills look in week 1. If the Raiders are able to pull this one out, I think it'd be because the offensive line plays better than expected and kind of keeps that offensive line going. They're able to get the run game going, and Derek Carr doesn't have to throw the ball 60 times, and they have more balance and they're more efficient. So if they do come out with the victory, I think it'll be largely because of that offensive line.
And to double back on that, is that your biggest concern for Las Vegas against the Steelers? Is the offensive line blocking that front 7 the Steelers have?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, already, the offensive line, there were some questions coming into this season with them losing 3 starters from last year. Rodney Hudson, Trent Brown, and Gabe Jackson. But another concern was their depth, and they already had 2 significant injuries to starters to begin this season, and so I think that has to be a concern. If they can't get that run game going and they get run one-dimensional against the Steelers defense, I think it'll be a long day for the offense. And so I think that definitely has to be the biggest concern.
What's your prediction?
I haven't settled on a score yet, but I think the Raiders, I think they can pull off an upset here on the road. I think with the Steelers offense looking at the way it did in week 1, Big Ben, he hasn't looked too good since that injury, the elbow injury that he had a couple of years ago. It's a lot of underneath stuff, and he can't push the ball deep that often anymore to take advantage of those weapons. And so Obviously there's some room for health here. If Ngakoue can't go and the pass rush isn't what it was in week one, that changes things. But if they're able to get after Big Ben and then sort of slow down that run game for the Steelers, I think they can keep it close. And as we saw in week one, if it's close, that offense has enough talent and they're explosive enough to make key plays to end up pulling off the win. And so, like I said, there's some room for health, but I think, with their defense, I think they should be able to hang with the Steelers offense and kind of have them look similar to the way they did in week one. And if, they are in that range of scoring, really they had the blocked punt for a touchdown. So they really only scored, a couple times against the Bills. If it's that kind of a situation, I think that's a game that the Raiders think they can win.
Well, we want to have one last good question before we leave. And Derek Carr talked about the rivalry with the Steelers and the Raiders, and he said the ball hit the ground. And in Pittsburgh, that's always something that's a point of contention. So we want to get your thoughts on that statement from Derek Carr, and do you agree?
It's film is a little grainy. I'll agree with what the refs ruled it, but Derek Carr, he's he has fun with the media a little bit. I'm sure he knew that was going to circulate on social media and get some fans a little bit riled up. So wouldn't read too deep into it, but I think he's just having some fun up there.
How do you think about after 50 years? How do you think they do not have conclusive evidence of that play?
Like I said, it's just the quality of video. You look at that play. It wasn't it didn't have the 4K cameras back then, and all the replay angles and reviews. And so, you're watching it in the way it looks. You kind of have your own judgment about it. But hey, it's 50 years ago. So anybody that's mad about that, they need to get something else to be mad about, man.
There's a lot of people that can be mad just about anything. Talk about the last 2 Super Bowl wins for the Steelers. But Tashan, thanks so much for coming on the show. That's Tashan Reed. He covers the Las Vegas Raiders for The Athletic. And Tashan, tell people where they can find your work.
Yeah, just theathletic.com. All my written work is there. We have a podcast as well, State of the Nation. But just follow me on Twitter at Tashan Reed, and I tweet out all my stuff. And appreciate y'all for having me on.
And that was Tashan Reed of The Athletic. We thank him for coming on the show. Guys, I want to get your thoughts on this matchup, Steelers versus Raiders. I'm pretty confident, as Chris said in the first break, that now suddenly everyone's all in on the Steelers bandwagon after last week with the Steelers and Bills. Of course, nobody really gave them a chance, and they walked into Buffalo. So expectations are much higher, and I'm going to say that the Steelers will win this game 27-17.
Yeah, I think of the scoring range. I'm going with something similar to you. I'll say the Steelers win 26-23. I'll say a late field goal wins the game.
It's always tough on a short week and you're playing across country and you injuries. But I think Las Vegas is gonna acquit themselves well here. I think that is a confidence builder that they have Monday night. They can complete against a higher end team in the AFC. However, I'm still going to go with the Steelers here. It's going to be a little bit higher scoring than people are going to think. I'm going to say Steelers is going to win 30-26.
Wow, that really is a higher scoring game. And I'm interested to see what the Steelers do in front of a home crowd. Yes, there were some blurbs last year with, of course, the pandemic in which fans were allowed in the building. But now it's a full house, and you've seen how it was with Buffalo last week. Sometimes you're a little bit too charged up for your own good.
Right. So we'll see.
Yeah, it should be a great atmosphere because, this is the first regular season game with fans in the crowd in the stadium since almost 2 years ago, or December 2019. So yeah, almost 2 years ago.
And guys, who do you think is going to be the big time player for the Steelers? For me, I'm going to go right back into that well, and I'm going to say it's going to be Cam Hayward once again. Just having a 12 pressure game, and I think that's probably going to change a lot of what the Steelers want to do defensively, which is a good thing. I think that's going to allow them to be able to drop back more in coverage and have a little bit more confidence to play great secondary play. And I think we're going to see a couple covered sacks, and I think Cam Hayward's going to get one of those covered sacks.
Yeah, I think the obvious one is T.J. Watt going up against Leatherwood there, who's at right tackle for the Raiders. But I'll change things up. I won't say Chase Claypool. I think he'll have a big game. I think he'll have a touchdown, at least a touchdown, and I would like to say over 100 yards receiving. I guess maybe that's a little bit of bold. I don't know, but I think he'll have a little bit more stat wise here against the Raiders than he put on a good game last week, but he didn't have like the stats per se. But I think he'll have a pretty good game here.
I'm going to go Najee Harris. I think he will play better. I think the Raiders' run defense is still questionable. They gave up I know it's not much, 65 yards to the running back from the fifth string running back from the Ravens, I think now.
Tysell Williams.
I think the run defense is, yes, Tyshawn Williams. He's going to be a factor in the passing game too. I think he's going to have a big game, 100 total yards and a touchdown. That's my stat line for him.
Bold predictions, Brandon, here on the Renegade Blitz. And be sure to check out this game. It's going to be 1 p.m. on CBS. Ian Eagle, Charles Davis, and Brandon Washburn are on the call again for the second straight week. Of course, you can also check out the game on the Steelers Radio Network with Bill Hillgrove, Craig Wolfley, and Max Starks. And of course, always be sure to check us out on the Renegade Blitz. You can follow us at @RBlitzPod. And you could follow myself, Ty Polk, at Prez, PREZ _TYPOLK. And Brandon, where can we follow you?
P. Walker to Dawn.
Sorry.
You could follow me at Blitz Videos, but I am in the process of bringing back my personal account soon. I just haven't got to it yet.
Yeah, we hope to get the big old main account with 85,000 followers back. But of course, we're at the mercy of the Tweeter bird, as always.
But we'll see how that goes. But if not, we'll be on the Blitz video account until further notice. So we'll have to see.
We're going to be relentless. We're going to be relentless tweeting. That's what we're going to do.
And of course, be sure to catch Tashan Reed as well. Follow him at Tashan Reed on Twitter. And guys, any final thoughts?
Just follow. I'm going to have an article there after the game. I'm going to be writing articles for Renegade Blitz. And you might see me get some enemy intel on certain games.
It's awesome. And of course, I'm going to attempt to have a column out every Wednesday on the RenegadeBlitz.com. This week, I talked about the Steelers pass rush. And of course, you could check that out on the RenegadeBlitz.com. That's our blog. And of course, you could always see Chris. He's always writing something on the RenegadeBlitz.com. Chris, talk about some of the articles that you've written this week.
Every week I do the point spread. So I usually like to use OddsShark. And like we mentioned during the podcast, the Steelers are 5.5 point favorites against the Raiders. But the articles I wrote about the Hayward grading out as the best player across the league, according to Pro Football Focus. And then I said Steelers got a steal in Melvin Ingram. I love that signing. We were really high on that when it happened. I think he's just a great addition there by Colbert and company. Earlier yesterday I wrote about Kevin Colbert was at North Carolina's practice to presumably get a close look at quarterback Sam Howell. I don't know if you guys saw that tweeted out by Mac Brown, the head coach of North Carolina, but Colbert there was right next to him. So it kind of got Steeler fans, their eyebrows raised a little bit, kind of thinking about after this season. What do you guys think about Sam Howell?
Well, I think that he didn't show very well against Virginia Tech. I actually thought that Kenny Pickett looked better against Tennessee than he is. Like I did say that on Monday, but it's just I'm not too impressed with any of these high-end quarterbacks that they're talking about right now. They'll have to show me something. And they're all about 6'1", 2 or 6'2". So they don't look like your big drop back Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes type quarterbacks. None of them are there. They're not that. So we're going to have to see something during the college football season.
Yeah, I saw some people in the comments section saying he's basically just Baker Mayfield. So I didn't know if they're saying that basically off his physical appearance, because he's only 6'1", I think I saw.
Well, it's a long season, at least with the college football season, and even longer season when it comes to the draft process. I'm sure the Steelers will do their due diligence, and of course, it's always great to get a retweet from Mac Brown, one of the most respected coaches in college football. And Mac, if you're listening, thank you for tuning in to the Renegade Blitz. That's Chris Ward. That's Brandon Walker. I'm Ty Polk. We'll see you next week for the recap podcast of Raiders Steelers. Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz. Read articles on renegadeblitz.com and like us on Facebook. Our podcast is available on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeart, and Spotify.